way of Will John.
Guys, welcome back again. Of course, we have a special guest, as all of our guests are special, Matt LaCroix, who I will also not be giving the intro for because he's a very multi-talented human being. So we're going to leave it to him. Matt, what's up? How you doing, man?
Hey, Will, it's really an honor to sit down and talk to you. I'm honestly a huge fan. You're one of the most talented soccer football players I've ever seen. So I truly appreciate sitting down and having this conversation, and I'm great. I'm fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, we know you. Congrats on everything with Gaia. I know you've just moved and you've got a lot going on. Yeah, so I've been a fan for a while, as we talked just before this got going. Guys, we're about to delve into some things that I think everybody who's a fan of the podcast will know that we love delving into this stuff, from having guys like Dean Radin on, Tom Campbell. We had Billy Carson on just not too long ago. So dealing into history is what I think we want to do today. And it's going to be a story that I'm sure a lot of you guys have not heard. So before we get into that, Matt, why don't you tell us who you are, how you've gotten on this road and path, and why you're qualified also to talk about this.
Thanks, Will. So I'm an inquisitive guy from New England that grew up in the outdoors, spent a lot of time really trying to push the limits of the physical material world, like as an athlete, doing a lot of running and hiking and exploring mountains and kayaking down whitewater rapids in rivers, and just trying to explore all those things in the physical world, because I didn't really know that there's a lot of other things that you really could delve into, these mysteries of ancient history and science, a lot of things that were not necessarily really taught in school. We're not necessarily in school and people are saying, hey, there are a lot of these mysteries about our ancient past that we don't understand, and please go out there and investigate them. That's not really what we're told. And so for a long time, I was just one of those guys that was just really inquisitive and just spent a lot of time in the outdoors. And eventually I started to ask a lot of questions, like a lot of other people do, about things around me, about consciousness. How, if we're just this, evolved ape that the brain is creating consciousness, then, what are we in terms of the cosmos? Are we just nothing? Or are we part of something greater? And those types of questions led me further and further down to looking into ancient civilizations, looking into ancient writings, the oldest writings in the world that try to tell this forgotten story about us, about who we are, and about what happened long ago. And like you mentioned before when we were chatting, it was like a rabbit hole. I didn't expect any of these things to occur. It sort of fell in my lap, and I wanted to investigate them because I already was that inquisitive person. I think you have to be a certain kind of person to really go full both feet into this and really looking into this. And so for me, it was an unexpected life path for me about 10 years ago. And then since then, it's just been a wild experience of learning as much as I could. I have a good background in terms of environmental science, but I'm not an actual archaeologist. But I took it upon myself to just study as much as I possibly could. Right now, I'm in the process of actually learning how to read Sumerian cuneiform, rather than going through just necessarily the best translators. I wanted to actually have that myself. So those are some of the things I've been working on to further some of my knowledge base before, taking on some of these new steps, like working with Gaia and some of the other things that I'll be doing.
I mean, that's incredible, because it shares a lot of similarities with my approach to learning. I'm a college dropout, technically, right? I left to go and play professionally at 19. And a lot of the reasons for that was mainly because it was good for me to go pro at the time. It made perfect sense. Also, the rest of my schooling would have been paid for had I wanted to continue. But really, it was stifling me, because the questions that I wanted to ask, you can't, in the traditional path and method, they're not there. And like you said, and delving into some of these mysteries, the school system is set up to tell you what reality is like this. And they tell you this is what it is. And they want to give you answers to things. It's not in whether it's Aristotle or Plato. Now my mind is missing. But the idea there is to question, and by questioning things, you gain knowledge. And so where do we start then? Because if you're trying to learn Sumerian or to read Sumerian, which is that possible? How is that possible? Let me stop there. How is that? What do you have to learn in order to learn an ancient?
It's important to know a little bit of why that's important. I think a lot of people will be like, who cares about Sumerian, right? Well, when you start to look into ancient text and information about the past, you run into some roadblocks, as you know. You run into things like you start studying, you look at religion, you look at all the, the Christian texts, and you maybe reject those pretty quick, like a lot of us have, because you learn quickly that those are based on much earlier writings, and they were tampered with and manipulated in many cases, but they weren't the original stories about our past. But that's the other thing that's a conflict, right? We're told that everything that's in these ancient stories are myths. They're not real. They're just allegories. They're just things to teach us lessons, and that none of those things really happened. But the more you start to really look into those stories, the most ancient of the writings we have of any civilization that existed, you find that, well, they actually mention very specific cities, and they mention very specific regions and individuals, kings that ruled. And the more you look at it, the more you start saying, wait a minute, this isn't a myth at all. This is telling us our history. And so the reason why Sumerian is so important is that Sumerian is the oldest advanced language. Some early indigenous cultures may have been doing some kind of a primitive language, but Sumerian is the first advanced language that we can find records are on the earth that actually survived. And I want to make that very clear, that it's very easy for things to disappear. That would be one of the highlights of this discussion. But basically, to get a little background, Sumerian and then later Akkadian that branched off it, that's the first record we have for all of these stories. But it's not like they just had a couple little stories. It contains essentially the essence of most of what religion eventually became. Those stories compounded into later becoming a lot of these Abrahamic religious stories, even stemming from ancient Hebrew texts and others. But I quickly realized that if I wanted to find the truth in this early story of us, you really got to go to the source, and that's Sumerian. And I want to just bring up that not only did I really want to focus on who the best Assyriologist translators in the world were, so I knew that I'm reading a correct message, not something that maybe was mistranslated and then give us a false view of what really happened. But after I did that, I've taken this time over the last couple weeks to really study cuneiform. And I want to just point out what's so amazing and unusual about it. Cuneiform is the only language on earth that instead of having an alphabet, which you're going to appreciate this as someone who speaks multiple languages and who studied this, but Sumerian is the only language in the world that instead of having an alphabet that you can learn, oh, that's the symbol for whatever letter to then understand it, there's no alphabet. Every single word and syllable has its own symbol, meaning that you have to learn thousands of characters more than you ever would for any other language on earth. Now, to compound on that, Sumerian's also what they call an individual closed language that's not shared by any other language in the world. So when you learn, you look at ancient Greek and you look at you look at Hebrew and you look at some of the earlier languages, you look at French and all those other languages, you find that a lot of times they have like a common ancestor of where those languages came from. And I'm not a linguistic expert, but when you look at Sumerian, you find that it's what's known as an isolated language, meaning that besides the small branch of Akkadian, it's not shared by any other languages in the world. It's almost like completely lost in time. And it truly is lost in time, because when those ancient texts were written, Sumerian eventually was so long ago that it died out, and for thousands of years, no one even knew how to read it. Right. And that blows my mind.
Totally. I mean, so then in trying to understand this, and I want to go back to give people an idea of some of the stories that there may be. Is the Epic of Gilgamesh, is that a Sumerian? Or is that?
It is. It is.
Okay.
And it's one of the most famous, obviously, right? Because like people have heard of that one more than others.
Right. Okay. And that was essentially got, let's say, translated to or transformed slowly into the story of Noah or the flood story. Is that correct? More or less, or
it's similar. So basically, let me just correct this, because some people are going to yell at me. So the Epic of Gilgamesh does contain the flood story. They call it the Great Deluge. We're going to go into that more as we go through, I'm sure. But the actual story of Noah is in what's known as the Atrahasis. But they do share very common similarities. For instance, that figure in 𝗪𝗛𝗟 is mentioned in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then the flood story is mirrored. So yes, it is, but it's not like if you were to take the Noah story and try to compare it, you would have to go to the 𝗪𝗛𝗟 for that.
I see. Okay. So then in your best abilities then, based on what everybody understands for what is modern history, and how maybe you can give us a contrasting view of what currently the current trope and paradigm is for how society says the last 10,000, 40,000, essentially the story of humans, what they say it is right now. And then you can go ahead and discuss what these tablets are suggesting and what other people who have studied, these subjects have figured out. I think it'd be good to just get a refresher on that.
Sure, absolutely. And I guess the first place to start is you got to shatter paradigms, right? And that's very difficult for people to do. And I feel like that's not really discussed enough. Individuals that maybe are studying this type of information may sometimes almost laugh at others, like, don't you understand and see? It's so obvious, right? Why can't you see this right in front of your face? Well, it's not that easy, because when you have an entire lifetime of what's known as conditioning, you go through and you're told what is what. Your parents tell you. Then in school, you get told this curriculum. Now, some might not know that curriculum that was created by the Rockefellers, that curriculum has to be taught in every school. You can't diverge from that, or you will lose your teaching license. And so how does all this stuff end up the way that it has? Well, because it's very much a doctrine of history. And remember, history is written by the victors. And that's probably going to be one of the key messages of this discussion, is we have to understand that what we're told as the story of what happened is not all, in most cases, is not really what happened, because it gets rewritten. And, when you think of Columbus conquering the Americas, the indigenous American cultures, and his view of coming in there and how we perceived it up until 5-6 years ago, and it's starting to change now. And then you go down through the Americas, right? Cortez conquering the Aztec in Mexico as a hero. And now we start to see it's not really like that at all. And then down to Pizarro in South America, you start to see that we're told in one version that those are the heroes. And then we find out that they're not really the heroes. So what is the story, right? What is the truth? Well, that's why you have to shatter your paradigms. You have to just take them, maybe don't get rid of them, put them up on a shelf somewhere and just put them there for a minute. And hold on to them. You don't need to get rid of them forever, but be open-minded towards what's possible and just consider it for a moment to see if it makes sense, right? And that's what you have to do. And I wanted to preface before I started discussing that so people can get that kind of mindset. We have a very conditioned mentality through a whole lifetime of people telling us what's real and what's not. And in many ways, when you really start to dig into the story and the evidence that exists, you see that it really is overwhelmingly almost screaming at us to look at our story in a different light. Look at how old civilizations are in a different light. Look at what defines us in a different light, and many, many other things. And so I guess to start, this is the paradigm we're taught, and then we're going to break away from that paradigm and bring in the evidence that really, I guess, shatters that paradigm. To me, completely shatters it. So we're told in school, if you go into high school and you're learning about mankind's history, human history, and you find out, well, we were nomadic hunter and gatherers that just randomly got knowledge of astronomy, astrology, mathematics. All those things just came out of nowhere, and civilization just sort of slowly came up out of the ground, and we started farming, and then eventually here we are, right? That's what we're told. There's no sophistication to it at all. There's no influences. There's no sophistication. We just randomly figured it out. And then now we're kind of an angry ape that's fighting over it. And it's okay because we have these primitive urges, and it's fine that we kill each other and do all these terrible things, right? That's not what the ancients tell us at all. In fact, if you take the oldest cultures in the world and what they wrote about, and you lump them all together, you get the complete opposite story. And it's not like it's just shared by one region. Everything from the Popol Vuh from the Mayan origin stories all the way down through the Inca crossing the ocean into a lot of the ancient Egyptian cultures and Mesopotamian cultures in the region that's today Iraq and Iran, up through Syria and all the way over into Baalbek, Lebanon, and up along the Mediterranean and Turkey and much further, you find that they echo nearly the same story. They state that human civilization is not 6,000 years old, like we're told, where it emerged. They're right about where it emerged, the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, which we'll talk about, but they're not right about how old it is and about how far back it goes and many other things. And that's this paradigm that we're going to destroy. Is we're going to look at, we can talk about ice core data, geological information. We can look at the Mohs hardness scale on stone, some of these massive megalithic stones that these cultures were able to create, and so on and so on, all the way to these ancient texts. And we find this incredible story that unfolds that completely redefines your entire reality is the best way to describe it.
Uh-huh. So with that being said, where does one begin? Because it's hard for everybody to understand all of these records and to run through all of that. And to the best of my knowledge, one of the most interesting things that I also saw was, which I'm obviously I know you're going to be aware of, Göbekli Tepe, and you may have spoken on it, and that's been one of the more recent ones I know. And that's obviously that's something. And just to kind of preface it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was our understanding that there were essentially hunter-gatherers in that region of Turkey. That's what we were told and that we assumed. And then they slowly started digging, and it turned out that this was possibly a sizable civilization that eventually disappeared. They moved out on them for God knows whatever reason. They buried the city, possibly even. Yeah. And I know I'm jumping just a little bit, but the reason for that is that's a really recent, let's say, acknowledgement by more or less the mainstream. I don't know if it's still getting some pushback, but it's hard for everybody to understand. Yeah, right. Yeah, I know. I mean, but so then with that being said, what have you? I kind of want to go back to where are we going to start to have that divergence? Where is that true divergence in what you've said? Is it at the flood
thinking process or whatever?
Yeah, in the flood. Where do we say that there's a point in history, right, where you either have to say that civilizations existed before this, and that is what led to this, or you can continue down the mainstream path. It seems very unlikely that the balance it's not at both ends. It's either one or the other. Either we existed as a civilization before and there was a flood or some sort of cataclysm, and there were remnants of a society that kind of understood it, or you have to believe that we just figured it out. Like you said, it's really hard to be in between. So what's the best evidence you would have for that then?
Well, I guess we can start in terms of some really hard evidence that people can look at to begin, right? Like you said, let's start where you mentioned, because I do think that Göbekli Tepe is a great example. And I know I talk about it a lot, but there's a lot of other sites around the world that have great evidence. But the reason why Göbekli Tepe is being so focused on is it's still being studied very extensively. And we're not in the time when things can be swept under the rug as easy, I guess is a good way to put it. Okay. So what makes Göbekli Tepe so important, right? Well, it's a site that, as you mentioned, the first peculiar thing about it was that it was buried under massive amounts of sediment. And I mean massive, I mean well over 10, 20 feet in some places of sediment, but it wasn't randomly, and it didn't randomly end up there because of some event. It was buried. They actually, some archaeologists have stated that it may have taken as much time to bury it as it did to create it. So why would a culture do that, right? Well, the easiest answer to that is to preserve it.
How long ago are we talking? Sorry to throw out.
That's an important segue to add in there.
Okay.
So remember, we're told in all of our classes that human civilization started in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, 6,000 years ago, roughly. That's about what they all state, okay? But archaeologists have gone into this site, Göbekli Tepe, that's only 20 or 30% excavated. Massive site, okay? And they found out that it's an astronomical temple. It's not like a oh, there's some brick buildings here that look kind of fun to explore. No, it's nothing like that. It's one of the most sophisticated astronomical temples in the world, perfectly aligned to essentially cardinal northeast southwest. It's basically mapping the heavens, and they have these massive T-shaped pillars that are more than 20 tons in some cases. That we can get into why those are important. But the important thing is when they uncovered that site and they've gone into those structures and they've taken organic matter from many different spots, not just one place, all kinds of different locations within those stones, tiny little bits of organic matter that was able to get, put way inside some of the cracks on those stones, those T-shaped pillars. And they found that, oh, wow, when you radiocarbon date it, that organic matter, because you can't date stone, very important to understand, you find that it is about 11,600 years old. Okay. So not quite double, but getting towards double the age that we're told that human civilization was supposed to have existed, right? But what's more important than that is as they were digging through the layers of soil, which is like looking at tree rings, it gives you this story of what happened and when it happened, right? The deeper you go, the older it is. As they went down, they hit all that sophistication of Göbekli Tepe and all that building. And underneath it, they did find nomadic hunter and gatherers. And before some people will be like, aha, see, the mainstream story is correct, it actually proves the opposite. Because what it means is that there were hunter-gatherer groups wandering around, but then all of a sudden, they just jumped into a civilization, like out of nowhere, right? Out of nowhere. And I just want to just have people wrap their heads around the idea of, can you imagine a group, hunter-gatherers, wandering around, looking for food, hunting here or there and moving around, and then deciding to just randomly stop in a place with very little water or food and create an incredible astronomical temple. First of all, why would they do that if they're just a hunter-gatherer group? And secondly, what would motivate a group like that to do it? And how would they even get any of that knowledge? It doesn't make any sense, right? It doesn't make any sense unless you start to consider the alternate theories, which are that they were influenced by somewhere. Now, and we'll go into this a little bit, but we won't go into too far yet. But when you really start looking at what Plato said in the Timaeus and Critias, talking to Solon, who had knowledge of ancient Egypt, ancient stories that predated the Library of Alexandria, which we can get into, but they clearly stated that there was a grand civilization, a maritime civilization known as Atlantis that everyone knows about, and it was destroyed violently in Earth cataclysms. That'll be one of the highlights that we continuously talk about. But those survivors from Atlantis went primarily to two places in the world. They went to Egypt and they went to the area of Turkey, that region of Turkey. And that's why that sophistication just came out of nowhere. It was essentially an attempt to try to preserve that knowledge so that it wouldn't be lost.
And that is something that you see as a theme across all, because I went down, let's call it another rabbit hole, where at some point, let's say 10, 15 years ago, I've been to Egypt, right? And I've seen the pyramids, and that's one of the coolest things ever, to be honest. That was one of the wonders that I was most impressed by, because number one, on TV, they don't show you that obviously you're just driving through Giza, that it's a city, and that you can just drive down the street and then all of a sudden up pop these incredible pyramids. And then when you get out to walk and see on them, it's stunning. But all those years ago, I went and kind of figured out that apparently there are pyramids everywhere, all over the world, in places that it just, in societies and cultures spanning different time periods that seemingly shouldn't have had contact and shouldn't, So is it possible then, my question to you, that there was in the past I don't want to call it global civilization, but a connection between, or was it this Atlantis period? Were they more globally connected? Were they more able to move around, across the earth? Did their understanding of Earth, was it way better? And deeper than what we give them credit for, which clearly on some end it must be, with the advance in astronomy, them looking out and understanding how to build things to match them up with the sky. They're understanding, and maybe you could get into even, I had written down here just the Dogon tribe, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, their knowledge of a star system.
Serious.
How is maybe you could, yes, I know I just threw a whole lot of things out at you, but sorry.
Okay, well, I guess we'll start with that and we'll go backwards. Okay, so we mentioned earlier on, what are these things that stand out that people can really just go, aha, right? Those moments that don't make any sense in conventional thinking that allows them to go down that rabbit hole. We'll start with the Dogon, because I love that story. It's one of my favorites. For those who aren't familiar with the Dogon, in the 1930s, French anthropologists went to visit this country in Western Africa called Mali. And, there are a lot of African cultures are pretty primitive, right? But we have to start wrapping our heads around what makes something more sophisticated and what makes something less sophisticated. If you have cars and, CD players and iPads and all those things, are you more sophisticated than a culture that has vast knowledge of the cosmos and the earth and understanding consciousness? How do you define what is really sophistication? Because to me, you really could think that a lot of those other things that I mentioned are really materialistic things that are almost blinding us to the real reality that exists around us. What does it matter if there's a solar flare that goes off the sun from a grand solar maximum and we're here living off a grid that's entirely based on electricity and it goes down? All of a sudden we seem pretty primitive, won't we, when everything goes out? So we have to wrap our heads around what makes a society more advanced and what might make something seem more primitive. But the Dogon was a really interesting group because they may have lived a primitive means of living off the earth and not needing giant houses and all these technological things. They were happy with that life. But what they had that was important was they had knowledge that went back far older than their culture, all the way back to Egypt. And the story of the Dogon, if you look into it, and I highly recommend people read The Serious Mysteries by Robert Temple, but the Dogon had come from Egypt long ago, and they settled in that area of Mali. And they had some stories that they had contained that were so important that they had a set of elders that would have to exclusively live in complete isolation from the rest of the tribe. Why? Get back to that old child's game called telephone. If you tell a story and then you pass that story to someone else and you pass it to someone else and then so on, eventually it's going to be distorted to something completely different than when it started. I guess, I don't know if you could call that human nature or what you would call it, but the Dogon realized that this story that they had was so important that the only way to contain it was to have these elders that essentially lived in a dark, an isolated cave, and they could have almost no communication with the outside world. They'd actually have like a liaison that the only person that could contact them, give them food and water. There was only one person. They would trust that one person. Why? Because they're the ones who had the story. And the only way for them to not lose that story was to protect it. So these French anthropologists come out of the jungle and they come up to this tribe and they're like, oh, look at this primitive tribe. And they're just talking to them. And the Dogons start telling this fantastic story that completely blew their mind. And they had no concept for how to explain it based on our conventional thinking of having nothing be connected, right? Every culture in the world is isolated. Haven't been connected by anything. Whatever they discover is completely random on their own. Well, the Dogons state, no, that's not at all how that happened. They state that there were, I guess, intelligent influences that came to them a long time ago. They called them Awanas, or the Nomo. And basically they explained that they were these beings that explain knowledge of everything. They explain knowledge of the earth, of the cosmos, about consciousness, about who we are. But more importantly, they gave them very specific knowledge of all the celestial movements in our Milky Way galaxy, but specifically the Sirius star system when it was Canis Major. Okay. And I got to just add, because I love this, if people don't know, go watch The Truman Show, that movie, The Truman Show. With Jim Carrey.
I saw it not too long ago, actually.
And make sure you pause it when that light falls out of the sky and he picks it up. Because what it says on it is Sirius, Canis Major, on the light. And the light in that movie represents him all of a sudden waking up and realizing he's in a complete illusion world, right? And I thought that was amazing because in many ways, the story of the Dogon can do the same thing. So to me, it's not an accident at all. So, okay, what am I spouting off about? Well, the Dogon understood not only our cosmos, right? Remember, telescopes hadn't been invented. They understood the movements of all of our planets in our solar system, but they also knew all of the movements of different stars in Canis Major, known as Sirius, A and B, and eventually C. The problem, and they could draw them for them, right? They'd get in the sand and they would show them all the alignments and where these stars were and where everything moved in the cosmos. And these French anthropologists were just stunned. They couldn't understand how this primitive culture could have known that. Radio telescopes hadn't even been invented yet. And they wouldn't be invented for many, many, many years later. Here's the wild thing. The Dogon knew not only that, but they knew of Sirius B and C. Sirius B hadn't even been discovered yet, okay? And Sirius C still hasn't been discovered. So how could this culture in the middle of Western Africa know that? Well, it basically echoes the same sentiment that all these other cultures in the world have, which is in their text, they state that they're not the ones who came up with all these things. Like, for instance, the Sumerians. If you look at this, if the origin story that we're told in school, yes, all those things we think of, mathematics, astrology, agriculture, metallurgy, raising animals, and all those in linguistics, everything you can basically think of that's a building block of a civilization, the Sumerians claim they were told that knowledge. And that's how everything started, that they were given that knowledge. And that's what's so wild about about all these things, because quickly you realize that, oh, wow, so it's not really that we're just randomly coming up with these things. There have been influences, and we can talk about those, that have created these civilizations. And those civilizations have had these secrets carried down over long periods of time. But this is the problem. They all state the same thing. There have been series of cataclysms, catastrophes on the earth that make what we've seen in our modern human experience here completely pale in comparison.
So extinction-like. So we're getting at the point that possibly civilization has restarted, come over, and I mean, we don't know how many times. Essentially, that's the idea.
Exactly. And so it became a game of, one, how do you map to plan for when those things are going to happen, which is what I believe Göbekli Tepe is. It's a way to map the heavens, to map what are known as the zodiac ages, or precession of the axis of the earth. Basically, it's how time is really observed, not how we observe time. How they observed time was based on these 2,100 year cycles. And you add up 2,100 years by the 12 different zodiac ages, you get a 26,000 year period, which was known as the Great Year. That's how they measured time. And they understood that based on those certain time periods, that those cataclysms would likely happen. So what they do, Göbekli Tepe, they create this incredible temple. They have all the things that haven't been discovered yet, all preserved there. Then they deliberately bury it to protect it, so that long in the future, when we come along and we don't believe that any of those civilizations existed, those things can be there for us to realize and then have that knowledge to bring back in and not have to start over again.
So, I mean, what does that say then about consciousness? Because if these, let's say, beings, we don't know whether these are physical beings, and I'd love to get your take on ancient aliens and how far it's gone. And I mean, now it's become this popularized concept, which probably, I can remember years ago when it was just, I mean, maybe not years ago, from like Eric von Daniken time, because that's before my time and probably before your time as well. But that's changed. It's become this popularized theory that's on the History Channel. It's kind of broken into the mainstream, and it gets made fun of, but then has its defenders, and it's gone too far. So that's almost in a sense where you're headed, but maybe not exactly. I don't want to just blanket term it as an ancient aliens thing, because there's so much that's attached to that now. But is that essentially where we're going? These are possible possibly aliens, possibly physical beings, possibly interdimensional. I don't know, possibly some sort of meditation, sort of, there are mystical experiences. We haven't even touched on what some of these cultures must have known from things like DMT and mushrooms. And there's a whole lot to be, understood as to who exactly these beings were, or were they just another civilization that clearly figured it out over all that time?
So let's start here. Let's preface this with stating that you've heard of the Fermi paradox, okay? The idea that we're in such a vast cosmos that has to have life, but yet we can't find it, right? It's just, where is it? It's a paradox. It's so weird that it should all be out there, but it's not. But is it? That's the thing that I want us to wrap our heads around. I think that too many people get stuck in this. I don't want to call it a primitive mindset, because that's not a nice thing to say. But it's a mindset where I think changes over time. It evolves as you start to look at it. If you were some advanced group, something that have reached so far in sophistication that all of these things that we think are important are almost like silly in that case, and you were advanced, and you would not be just traveling around in some craft. Okay, that doesn't make any sense. Not only that, but points between star systems are so many thousands of light years that those are just conventional thinking and I know I'm going to offend a lot of UFO people out here, and I'm sorry, but I really do think that we have to look at all of this in a completely different way. For instance, remember when have you seen the movie Contact with Jodie Foster?
I just saw it. Yeah.
Okay. 90%, and I don't know if that number is actually accurate, I'm just throwing that out there. People were like disappointed in that movie, right? Because,
that's true.
We're going to finally see these aliens, right? Did you? No.
Yeah, no.
They created this space for her. Not to spoiler alert, nobody's seen it. They create this space for her, and then they take on this representation of her father. And then they communicate through her father in a place that's not Earth, right? It's some kind of a creation of a place that would be comfortable for her. Shows like an ocean with ocean waves coming in, because they know we're from Earth, right? That's what we're comfortable with. And so I think that's of course that Carl Sagan was one of the main people who wrote that movie, right?
Yeah.
I think that's the mindset we should wrap our heads around, is that not like little green men flying around in these ships and landing and coming out and deciding to, no, I don't think that's how it is at all. And I think that's why the Fermi paradox exists, because any group that's advanced wouldn't just pollute a timeline of another culture by just flying around everywhere and be like, hey, waving to us. That's silly. If you reach that advanced state, why would you do that, right? And that's exactly what all the evidence I see really points towards, is that, yes, there were influences that were absolutely intelligent influences from nearly every one of these cultures. Either the culture was started from a knowledge seeding, or those individuals that were already incredibly wise and had learned that, some ancient priests or whatever, were traveling and then teaching others. That's how I think that all of this went down, based on how I've studied it. But it means that we need to change our perception about how we view that polluted term aliens, or how we view, and I don't even use that term. I use something like entity or being or whatever it is, because frankly, we don't even know what's possible. Our perception, our five senses in this really limited physical world, we can't see most of really what's around us. And I know you know what I'm talking about, right? If someone was to go into a deep state of meditation, even potentially take some of these psychoactive things, like you mentioned, DMT, everyone says the same thing. Anyone that goes down to the Amazon rainforest and meets with the shaman and drinks ayahuasca, right? DMT, the primary component of that, goes into a place that's not our reality. That's it. There's no other way you can describe it. It is not our reality any longer. You've now left the material physical reality and you're somewhere else. What does that mean? Well, the ancients state that our reality is only one of like a sandwich-like or onion-like view of what reality really is. It's like layers of perception, right? Dimensions layered on top of one another. And we are almost like in the middle, sandwiched in the middle. And most of us can't really perceive the higher realities or even the lower realities. We're sort of stuck in this like a cone mentality of view where we can't really see much of what's happening around us. But what happens when you break down those barriers, right? You take those things, it shatters those paradigms and those barriers. And all of a sudden you go into a place that is hard to describe. And there's intelligent beings there every time. That's what everyone always says, right? Always some kind of intelligent beings there. And they communicate and they say incredibly intelligent things. They don't tell you, hey, this is the best way you can go barbecue some steaks.
Yeah.
None of that stuff matters at all. That's all silly, almost silly and
Right.
stupid. They tell
Right.
you things like, this is how you can learn to change. This is what consciousness is. This is blah, blah, blah. They go on and on, right?
That's what I was going to go. And that's what I wanted to touch on, because as a guy who is, and I've told this story before, I think on separate podcasts, is that my mom was the one that got me into meditation, but I didn't do it when she said. I was very young, 14 or so, and I can remember walking upstairs and she was meditating. She said, "Hey, you want to meditate with me?" And I was just like, I'm 14 or 15.
Yes,
Like,
right?
this is so stupid. Like, why would I do that? Of course, it eventually did take just a few years later, so I've been more or less, I like to call myself more or less a lifelong meditator, and I will, never stop. And one thing you'll notice is that you have to start questioning your senses and what reality really is when you stop. And it's very hard for the modern man or woman to really digest that unless you have stopped and tried to think. You want to slow down your thoughts, slow down your experience, and how am I perceiving the world? And when you get in a meditative state and you get into a very deep state, things happen and your senses change, reality changes, and it's not weird at all. And part of the issue is that not enough people are doing it. It's definitely changing. I think we've seen that. But with the question that I was going to ask to you before even getting into consciousness, because that's something I want to dig on, because we had Dean Radin on, who I think you may know of. Are you familiar with who Dean Radin is?
I'm not familiar with his work, but I know of him.
Okay, well, yeah. So he is the chief scientist, I believe, at the Institute of Noetic Science, and they study consciousness, obviously. And he was involved with some. It is called remote viewing experiments, in the 70s for the CIA. And, he had, some secret clearances and stuff like that to do stuff, but that's a whole nother subject. But before we even dig into consciousness, you mentioned UFOs, and that I just want to get your take really quickly on the fact that now UFOs, which I'm sorry, not UFOs, UAPs are a real thing. Because when we were kids, this statement just you could not have that on mainstream, on CNN, not even, forget CNN, on 60 Minutes, there's a full thing that just says, oh yeah, by the way, yeah, we don't know what that is. Acknowledgement of it. I'd love to know if you have any just take on what that is and why now, because they're not new.
Yeah.
It's not new footage.
Now, this is going to definitely piss a few people off, and I'm sorry. But I want to provide my side of it based on the evidence and just to help clarify things. First of all, yes, those things, yeah, those are real. Those are there, right? I'm not trying to be like pretending those things aren't real. Absolutely, those are real. But when you start looking into things like the Nazis and what they were playing with some of the technology when the Germans were looking at some of the advanced technology, one of the reasons why they actually lost the war was they started getting so obsessed with technology. Not that I'm saying anything about which way it should go. I'm just stating the fact.
Got you, yeah.
They started getting obsessed with technology, and they started playing around with anti-gravity technology. And you can see all kinds of papers on that, okay? And when World War II was ending, the United States was frantic to get a lot of this advanced technology because they wanted to be the first one to create an atomic bomb. And they knew that the Nazis were close. But they were also playing with things like anti-gravity technology and all these things, which where that came from is another discussion, right? But they had that information and that knowledge. And so just go look it up on your computer, and you can pull this up, but it's called Operation Paperclip. And they went over and they took like over 100, I think it might even been 1,000 of these Nazi scientists, and they brought them back to the United States, and they basically just like tried to take every bit of knowledge they had. And all of a sudden, you get like these incidents of these weird craft flying around the United States, and they're like kind of covering it up, and then all these things. And then here we go, the United States becomes the most advanced technological superpower of the world. Just like out of nowhere, right? And you really start to find out that it really was German Nazi technology that they took. And then you have all these strange bases that are opened up by the US government, like Dulce and all these other things, and you can't go near them. And that's where they always see these craft flying around, right? And there's a lot of, well, not always, but that's commonly where you see these things happen around these super high end military bases that are not supposed to exist. I believe, based on what I've studied, that most of that is secret government technology that they're just kind of like testing and playing around with, right? And then they can't say that, so they kind of pretend they're hiding in, like it's aliens, right? So that people are looking at the wrong
Sure.
way. It's like misdirection the whole time. Really, when you think about it, like I was saying when I was discussing before, why would a intelligent group travel thousands of light years from some star system somewhere to just blatantly fly around obvious in front of us, and with the knowledge that you're polluting that entire timeline of that species and causing all of those problems that you're causing? The easiest way to say it is, I think it would be irresponsible, completely irresponsible. And I just think that that's why the Fermi paradox exists, because any group that was able to get advanced enough to be able to travel the stars wouldn't just be in some craft. They would be using things like dimensional gateways, means to travel in ways that aren't linear. They wouldn't be a linear mindset. And I think that's how we should look at these things, where a lot of the stuff that we're, like, for instance, a lot of this stuff you just mentioned, these disclosure, I think it's misdirection. People are focused on that. They're not focused on the other things. They're not focused on who these influences were of all of these ancient civilizations. Why, when you go to a place like Machu Picchu in Peru, why you see incredible mortarless megalithic blocks, giant multi-ton blocks on the bottommost levels. And then as you go up, it becomes more simplistic using brick and mortar. If we're told that civilizations were more advanced later and not earlier, it's completely backwards. Now those are the things that we really should be asking about, because they break open the paradigm of all of what's happened here and where those influences came from.
So then, that being said, and I think you're probably pretty spot on, because it's very suspicious to think, why now, with all the why now. The disclosure is a very strange thing, and a topic that is just too complicated and too complex to really understand. But everybody in what's clearly happened over the course of these last 10, maybe even, to be honest, probably since I would say September 11th, just been a slow decline of people's faith in what the government has as far as the truth giving out to them. And it's just, it's just, so it's a strange thing. And I'm glad you touched on the occult and the Nazis, because that's also something that doesn't get a whole lot of mainstream play. And I was having a discussion with somebody the other day about my understanding of World War II and what school gave me. And I basically just said, Hitler bad, America was great, and that was the general thesis of what I think school wanted to portray to me: a villain and a savior. So if you really want to delve deeper into what happened and things like that, there's all this, and I don't know what's real on the true occult. And there's a lot of different stories now, some that can be verified and some maybe that can't, about what the Nazis really believed about ancient history, what they knew about some of the stuff that you're talking about. And so that's my segue into these ancient civilizations. Like, take the Dogon for instance, they knew about ancient knowledge and things. Is it possible then? I'm assuming it's possible that these ancient civilizations knew something about our universe, our consciousness, how we interact, maybe even why we're here, besides how we got here, why we're here, and how to function. So is there anything that you've learned across all of these studies for what these, maybe even the cuneiform tablets, that is in a practical sense for somebody that wants to say, learn from your history, because, learn from your past. You don't want to repeat those mistakes. What is it, and what are some things that you pulled from these ancient societies that we could use? Is it consciousness, meditation, balanced life? What have you found?
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with answering your question about this occult knowledge. The Germans became obsessed with going into these ancient civilizations and going into some of the knowledge they knew pertaining to understanding the planet, the energy grids of the planet, and how free energy, anti-gravity, free energy, how things like that could work, because those cultures had already figured those things out. That's the connection of why they were obsessed. They knew that a lot of ancient cultures had knowledge of physics, knowledge of energy, and that's what all of this comes down to. So let me give you an example.
Before you even get into that example, could I even cut you and just say, what would be the best source for that? What would be the best source for someone to try and figure out that the Nazis did have that understanding? Because it's so not mainstream. It's not.
Oh, I know.
What would be the best place for us to look at, to say, look, not Hitler, maybe Hitler's second, third in command was obsessed, or this group. Is there a source for that?
I'm not an expert on that area. I've just, it's one of those things where it's like a rabbit hole where I've been online reading just countless things and verifying things here and there. I don't have anything in terms of definitive, like a book to mention, but I know there's a lot of people listening to this that do. So please, mention that in the comments or whatever, because I know there's a lot of stuff out there. I don't have it right in front of me. But yeah, there is a lot of people who have studied that. I think that's why in the Indiana Jones movies, they showed how the Nazis were in like Africa and in all these different places. That was the reason. They knew that there was ancient knowledge protected in those cultures. Simple as that. And then that's why we find such sophistication in all of the megalithic building that they did, the locations of where they built it, and why they built it. So I guess we can use this to connect to now and how it relates to us. Everybody, most people that listen to me, they know this, but you got to say it because it's one of those things that people have to hear. You visit the pyramids of Egypt, right? The largest structures on earth. They're in this pyramid design. And we're told that pyramid design was simply just to house pharaohs, so that a tomb was put in the bottom, and then you'd have this giant structure that would be they'd be honoring this great pharaoh, right? And that we've grown up in school that was the purpose of pyramids. They're tombs, right? It's almost like ingrained in us that that's what they are. And then you start to learn about it, and simply learning about what the pyramid, some of the details of the pyramids can be, it's singular in itself for destroying someone's paradigm. So give you a little bit of information. The pyramids are found in a very specific place on the earth for a reason. When they went in to uncover them, early pictures in the 1800s of like the Great Sphinx, it was buried in sand, okay? It had already been lost. So when we think of as the dynastic Egyptians, Khufu, right? Menkaure, all those dynastic pharaohs, you find out that no, we've never found a pharaoh in any of those pyramids. And in fact, there's no writings in any of the pyramids at all. If anything that is contained, someone else, a scribe, went in and actually did that, like on a corner or something like that. But they were actually forbidden to go in and even write, and they knew that. These pharaohs knew that, and that's why they didn't go in and tamper with the pyramids. You find out that all of the pharaohs of Egypt were buried at a place called the Valley of the Kings, which is over 400 miles to the south, near Aswan, which is actually where a lot of the granite for those, hundreds of miles away would come from, because it had a high quartz silica content. And that's one of the key things to remember here. So we have these three enormous pyramids, right? And they used to be covered in what are known as limestone caps. So they had limestone coverings on them, and they were granite inside. Okay, and that was their functionality. And there was no pharaohs in them, but they had these strange air shafts, they were called, that pointed to different star constellations. Okay. So if they're not tombs, then what are they? Well, they realized that they're actually perfectly harmonically tuned to both human consciousness and the energy of the earth. And when you look at what are known as energetic ley lines, now, for people who don't know what those are, when we think of as a planet, a terrestrial planet, which is what Earth is, which means it's mostly composed of rock, not a gas planet. It is, in many ways, the ancients actually had names for it, and they would call it like a conscious being, the Earth. They would call it things like Tiamat and Sophia and all these different names throughout history. But to them, the Earth was a conscious living entity. And that's why energy mattered so much, okay? So what they would do was, the Earth has a north and a south pole, okay? Those poles keep everything in the material world in its place. Changes that occur on a physical level always have to occur on an energetic level first. That's just the way it is. we perceive everything on a material, physical level, but really most of the meat of what occurs outside of that leads to everything functioning is on this non-physical level, this energetic level. So if you have a north and a south pole that are balancing this energetic planet, right, this outer ozone that protects the whole planet from these ultramagnetic rays, violet solar magnetic rays that come out and affect the whole planet, you learn that if those poles are based on this energetic wave that crosses all over the planet, that's part of a grid known as ley lines. And ley lines simply mean these energetic convergence zones on the planet. And when those things get disturbed, the ancients knew that that's when you get problems. And I don't subscribe to all these cataclysms simply being asteroid and comet strikes. I don't think that that's solely what was responsible for all of these events. I think that the main component is the sun and the cosmic alignments of things like getting near the galactic center of our Milky Way and all these different things. Because the reason I say that is, you mentioned how there's pyramids all over the world and there's ancient temples all over the world that relate to specific older cultures that had knowledge that was lost. That's the common theme, right? Those cultures created incredibly sophisticated temples and structures based on very specific geology, and then they vanished. And then another culture came later and tried to mimic them, and then they might have vanished too. And it's this stepping stone down to where we think we're so advanced now, but in many ways our understanding of things is almost childlike compared to them, okay? So when you look at structures around the world, start in Peru. A lot of the Inca temples, Ollantaytambo, Sacsayhuaman, Machu Picchu, over into places like along Lake Titicaca, Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, these very bizarre razor edge stone cuts that would have been impossible with Bronze Age tools to create these. In fact, we can't even create some of them now. Places like Baalbek, Lebanon, with a trilithon that weighs almost 1,200 tons, basically the size of multi-buses stacked on top of each other, told that the Romans moved it. It doesn't make any sense. But the point I'm trying to make is every one of those structures, if you map them across the world, they're on these energetic convergence zones on the planet. And in fact, in places like Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, around Lake Titicaca, you almost can't even live there. There's no water, there's no food. So why would they build there, right? Yes, the climate was different back then, supposedly potentially making those places more hospitable, but that wasn't the reason. They would know that these locations were important, and ancient texts talk about how they would lay divine bricks and these divine blocks in certain places that they needed to, because they realized that they had to control the energy of the earth or catastrophes would wipe everything out.
Okay,
So when you look at,
sorry to cut you. Then to understand it all, there was clearly there was a point. There was a rhyme and reason behind why we have these ancient structures in those places. And you're saying it's very possible that they're there in order to keep the balance and keep the peace, because the ley lines represent order across not necessarily order, but an energy flow across the planet. And therefore, that's why we find the pyramids there. We find Machu Picchu where it is, and there's across Europe. I can't even think of, or Stonehenge maybe. Does Stonehenge follow across some ley lines? And so, with that being the case, then I have to ask the ultimate question, which is, what do they know? What is besides that? What is the end game of having this? I have a pyramid here. Is it an energy? Is it do something else? Because that's really what I would love to know. I mean, you clearly, maybe you don't know the answer to that. You maybe have an inkling, but it seems to me that it's just so fascinating, because one of my last questions was going to be, who's keeping the guard? Who's utilizing this? If you have all this ancient knowledge, and it is, like we said, and it's very possible that the Nazis figured some stuff out, and if you have an understanding of these ley lines, well, what can you do? Can you and I just go out and build a great building there, a skyscraper there of some kind, and utilize free energy? Or
So that's a great point. Look at today's modern buildings. We build with mostly metal and sometimes brick and sometimes wood, but these various things that aren't giant blocks of stone, right? Yeah, you see some large central buildings that are still made out of stone, but largely we don't do that. We don't really build that way. What needs to be understood, I guess the first place is, there are locations in Egypt. You can see in Karnak, Temple of Seti, various places, there are blocks that are things like Aswan granite or even things like travertine that come from potentially 1,000 miles away, right? So you have a culture, you're going to build a structure. First thing you're going to do is go get these multi-ton blocks and transport them over 500 to 1,000 miles. Why? Why not just take the stone you have right there? Because the stones contained quartz or silica. That's it. What do we use that today for? Watches. Today, modern watches, if you have a watch, you'll see that that's one of the primary components is quartz or silica still in that, keeping time. Okay? These cultures knew that they would have this specific type of block. It would have an energetic resonance frequency that would then be able to be harmonically tuned to the earth. Okay? Now you talk about how these things all over the world are here and they're functioning. Well, that's the thing. They're not functioning any longer. And that's the most critical part to understand when you look at geological records and you look at ancient Sumerian tablets of this, what's known as the Great Deluge, and all these different events that led to tsunamis and solar flares causing vitrification on stone, meaning melting stone, which by the way takes over 1,000 degrees to melt stone or quartz. 1,000 degrees, right? We're complaining when it, like right now, it's going to be 95 today.
Yeah.
Degrees here. It's really hot, right? Imagine 1,000 degrees. You basically would just evaporate any life that existed on the surface. Well, in a lot of places, like in Peru, in Tiwanaku, in Egypt, we find stones that we know are from those cultures that are like burned or melted. Okay, there's my favorite one is called the Colossi of Memnon. Okay, out of the Theban necropolis. Go look up the Colossi of Memnon. Okay, it's basically these giant statues outside of Ramses temple where they're broken and burned and melted on one side only, on the north or northeast side only, on every structure, right? Not only that, but all these structures that were built in these places are all off magnetic north by 23.5 degrees. Every single structure on these locations is off by 23.5 degrees, meaning that this cataclysm shifted the entire Earth's wobble. That's how serious it was, that we're no longer in the same magnetic north as we were back then. So these cultures, these events were so serious that they had to create underground cities to live, like in places like Göbleki in Turkey, where you have hundreds of rooms with connected air shafts to them that we're told they just were built to like hide from an army. Tell you one thing, that's not a very good place to hide if you ask me. But if you were hiding from a solar flare, that the temperatures we could spike 1,000 degrees and wipe out life, and you'd have that increased radiation, that'd be the only place you could go, would be down in those places. And that's where I just want to mention one more thing. That's where they would go. But I want to mention one more thing. When you go to places like the Osirian in Saqqara, Egypt, you go down, way, way down underground. That's the common theme every time with this. These pyramids are built over these giant underground systems where there's aquifers, right? Connecting right down to the earth. When you go down in there, you see these giant stone boxes, right? They're like a tomb, but there's no emptiness in them to put someone in. They're just solid granite blocks. A lot of them are blown open, broken right out. And a lot of these other structures are either broken or show severe damage. And I had a lot of great researchers, Brian Forrester and Robert Schock and many, many others. I just want to mention because I'm not going to take credit for all this, but a lot of great researchers have looked into this, and one of the common themes that has come up is that energetic grid that they were trying to keep balanced became overwhelmed and destroyed everything, like shut the whole system down and wiped all those cultures out. And today there's, we're in a similar situation where here we are 12,000 years ago. And I haven't mentioned yet, but geologic samples really do seem to indicate that these events occur about every 12,000 years or so. And
so we're due for another.
Later, right?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a perfect segue because that's where I was going to go. It was my more or less, to try and summarize question was going to be, where do you think we're going? What, based on a good study of history, you can sometimes predict the future, sometimes, right? I mean, it's not always that way, but where do you see us going then as a civilization? Or do you think that we have this ability? I mean, obviously climate change is in the news now. That's a thing and will continue to be a thing for for the foreseeable future. Have we screwed up, Or is there a way back? Or do you think we're done? Or the powers that be too powerful? And what do you think?
Well, if you look at it on the surface and you look at how unbalanced we become and how broken we are in many ways, becoming so focused on things like the material world, trashing our planet, having no respect for it at all, almost losing our connection to nature, not even caring. People say, I just see trees or whatever they see. That's a broken person, in my opinion. That's someone who's become disconnected to the very heart and root of what we really were. And so some would look at that on the surface and say, do we even deserve to get to the next stage, right? All these incredible ancient cultures that came before us that had that balance and that knowledge, and they were wiped out. So why do we deserve to get to the next point? Well, it's very interesting because the Maya have prophecies that they have long ago predicted. I know everyone knows the 2012, right? The world's supposed to end, which wasn't what they said at all. They actually said that the current state of consciousness would end and it would be the birth of a universal consciousness. And in fact, that's what Chichen Itza with Kukulkan's temple, the 9 different stages, the levels of his temple reaching the top with the feathered serpents at the bottom, that represents the ascension to the top of the higher universal consciousness. And the Maya stayed, well, as broken as we are through fear and war and in the material world, we're prophesized to go to the next stage. And that is interesting. But they state that we're the fifth, they say, the fifth society or culture of mankind that's come after the rest have been wiped out. So there's 4 that have come before us. Atlantis would be in there, ancient Sumer and Atlantis, and those cultures that were in Peru and Bolivia that they call the Viracotians. That's what the name they give them for is. But they state that those cultures came and went, but we're not supposed to be destroyed this time. This is the one that's supposed to stick, which I find kind of ironic and funny. But so to give people some positive stuff about my thoughts on this, a lot of people are running around really thinking that the world's going to end and that all these things are going to lead to our destruction. And the more that I look at it, the more that it may actually be a byproduct of how powerful and controlling the elites actually became, because they're so fearful of everything being destroyed that there will, because of their power and their influence with technology, that may be what ends up saving everybody in the end. And why do I say that, right? When you look at a lot of evidence, I highly recommend people looking at John Brennan with what's known as SAIs. I talk about that stuff all the time, geoengineering, and the effect that it can have to minimize solar impacts on our geomagnetic poles of our planet. And I highly recommend people look at some of the technology that has maybe been used in the North and South Pole. Why do I say that? My favorite example is the Inuit of Northern Canada. They have come out with alarms over years and years, over the last many years, because they were one of the only groups still left on the planet. They were hunter and gatherers based on the stars. They would use the stars to navigate to locations. And elders came out, and you can look at this. It's really common. You can see it all over. There's interviews that have been done with some of these elders, and they state that the stars are in a different alignment than they used to be. They're not in the same place anymore. They can't follow the same routes because they're not right anymore. What does that mean? The same time, the last couple of years, you look at NASA and a lot of government organizations have been flying up to the North Pole. You probably know this, Will, because they have to go up and readjust where magnetic north is. Why? Because it's wobbling. It's been moving around. And that's what's causing the Inuit to see a different star alignment. What does that mean? It means that our Earth is being influenced and wobbling enough that it's changing its orientation enough that those star alignments are changing and magnetic poles are wobbling around. When you have a wobble, you get things like increased volcanic activity, some increased climate activity, storms, but you don't get anything catastrophic. If you get a shift, all hell breaks loose. Because truly that's what's keeping the tectonic plates in the place that they are, is based on this energetic balance of the North and South Pole, and that's what the ancients knew. So if you get a rapid shift of, let's say, the North Pole and the South Pole, you basically have, it's almost like if you're driving in a car and you have a fish tank with a ton of water in it, right? And then you just stop and all that water just keeps going. That's what this essentially is like. It's like we're trying to stop a process from just completely caving in and causing destruction by trying to slow it down and using technology. And I think I would be willing to bet, Will, and this goes all the way back to the German technology and the occult we said, we may be, honestly, that we may still be here because I believe they're using technologies just like the ancients did, but different, like more advanced technologies to prevent those very same things that they were trying to prevent. And I think that that's why so many strange things are happening with, like, for instance, the planet is the hottest that we have in records that have ever been kept, right? And that's classic for what occurs when the sun goes through what are known as grand solar maximums to grand solar minimums and vice versa. We know that because ice ages continuously form, disappear, and form. And that represents the sun going through different cycles. So the ancients knew that. And every time you go through a cycle, all hell breaks loose. And that's what they were essentially trying to protect because, Will, what would be the most important thing of all for a civilization if you were going to be wiped out? You would need to protect that knowledge, wouldn't you?
Memory. Yeah. Yeah.
For the next to come. And I really think that that's what a lot of this comes down to.
Huh. That is an incredible thing to think about, that they could be possibly influencing. It's just such a hard thing to grasp in my head to imagine something like maybe HARP and DARPA or I don't know, any of these massive or whatever, the Large Hadron Collider. And I know there's an official story for what that is, and there's an unofficial story for other people with Shiva being represented and them putting all sorts of weird myths and things outside it. But the idea that we have possible technology and things like that, and everybody has to completely understand that things that are in the quote unquote black world for technological speaking, that come out, they will come out in 60 years, 100 years, but they're here now. And that's just a fact. We all know this, from the internet being around well before we all got a chance to run around on it in the 90s, to planes and technology. It's all there. So it's very possible that we have these things. It's just to see that at such a grand level, and to influence our reality, it's mind blowing. It's just, and we sit here and I have a few more. I'm gonna kill it here just because we're gonna have you back on, and we have to have you on some more.
I know we didn't even talk about a bunch of the stuff we were going.
Oh, but yeah, which is fine, because that's always what happens on our podcast anyway. It's cool to have these open ended discussions and to ask questions to somebody who's delved into this stuff. But maybe next time we'll even go in with an even more concentrated question.
Fine-tooth comb, right?
Yeah. But I wanted to give all the people here who are just going to be, there's so many people are going to be hearing this for the first time. They've got enough now to go dig into some stuff, go check out your, YouTube channel. And what else can you announce? Where should guys go for more from you?
Sure. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I have a website, thestageoftime.com, that I have a lot of cool stuff for people to check out on there. Timelines and graphs and ancient texts. People can go read if you want to know read some of the most important of these ancient Sumerian stories that talk about ancient bloodline kings that ruled for hundreds of years or more, and these disastrous deluges that the gods brought down to wipe out all of humanity because there were all these things like the Book of Enoch talks about with giants and all these things. But all that stuff is in these ancient texts. So anyway, thestageoftime.com. My YouTube channel is Matthew LaCroix, and I also have 2 books, The Stage of Time and The Illusion of Us.
What do you have going on with Gaia? Can you announce that yet, or is that still under wraps? I mean,
I can't talk about anything that I'm doing with Gaia, but I will be working with Gaia for some pretty exciting stuff coming up in the future.
Sure.
That I'm really looking forward to doing, and I guess I encourage everybody to, if you can, subscribe, and I'm hoping to take some of this research to the next level.
Yeah. Okay. Well, awesome. Listen, guys, go check out all that. I know for a lot of you guys are scratching your heads and you're ready now to go delve into more. So Matt will be back. We're going to have Matt and Billy on here. When this is up, it'll probably just be a few weeks before that other one airs. So go check that out. If you are watching this, leave a comment down below, and otherwise go check out the show notes. And Matt, thanks for being here, man. We'll do this again.
Thank you so much, Will. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to talk to you again.
All right. See you guys later.